Hello and welcome to CivilNet. I'm here with Ms. Tanja Radocaj. She's the representative of UNICEF in Armenia. We're going to talk about UNICEF's role in the country and some of the organization's key initiatives. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So last week, the UN actually celebrated its 25th anniversary in Armenia. I'm wondering if you can give an overview of some of the major accomplishments that the UN has achieved in these 25 years.
It's a long list of accomplishments and it would be impossible to repeat it now, but I would say that there are generally accomplishments in the area of human rights and democratization of the society, and then also the economic development and making sure that human capacities and natural resources of Armenia are being used in a way that is not jeopardizing the future.
Right. And in terms of UNICEF's role, it came to Armenia 2 years after the general UN office. What are some of the main initiatives that you're focusing on right now, the key goals?
When UNICEF came to Armenia, it was still a very, very difficult time. So for first couple of years, it was purely humanitarian mandate, helping people to survive, helping children to survive. UNICEF invested a lot in vaccination, in healthcare, making sure that children are getting important nutrition, and that gradually became a more developmental agenda. So after year 2000, the focus is more on changing systems, so changing education system, making sure that children attend preschool, making sure that children do not unnecessarily end up in these big residential care institutions that were inherited from Soviet times. So it's really working more to change the system of public care for children in all different areas.
Right. And as you know, currently under debate in Armenia, we have a proposed law on domestic violence, and if passed, this law would institute criminal and administrative liability for domestic violence cases. Mm-hmm. This legislation has unleashed a very intense public debate, and it seems as though the focus of that debate has been mostly on violence against women. But I'm wondering if you could provide an overview of the situation regarding violence against children and your view on this proposed measure.
I'm aware of the very hot public debate about domestic violence law, and from my side I would say that no society can thrive if any members of the society should be or are exposed to violence without punishment. So it applies for equally men, women, children and elderly people. And in this debate, very often it was debated only from the position of women in the society, which is a very important debate. But children are part of the family and they are either victims or witnesses of violence. And when children live in the situation of violence, be it that they are directly affected or indirectly, they have lifelong consequences. First of all, it affects their confidence, their ability to learn, their mental health, and overall physical health later in life. There is a lot of evidence that children who are exposed to violence in early age will have later in life health problems, so people don't know about it. They think that preventing violence is something that is private. It is not. It belongs to the whole society because the effects of it are, first of all, human rights issue, but there are also very serious consequences on the society later on.
And one of the main criticisms from people against this law is that it would undermine, quote unquote, traditional Armenian family values. Where do you think that critique comes from, and how can we work to maybe change the societal perception to understand why it's important to pass this law?
I understand that this voice is coming from people who are really concerned about family values and families. Still, I believe that no family should be based on the value of violence. And I don't think that is Armenian tradition. So let's go back and see what is really the tradition of Armenian family. Is it about love and care, or is it about violence? If we are talking about undermining Armenian families, we can also talk about children being taken away from families for poverty reason. And we have been fighting that for the last 15 years, saying that it is not necessary to remove children from families because just families are poor. So, now I think it's used a little bit to stop the debate, but my firm belief is that every family should be based on love and care and not on violence.
Right. That segues nicely to the next question I had, which is about institutionalization of children in Armenia. And I know that the Every Child to a Family campaign is one of UNICEF's key focuses. Could you just tell us a little bit about that area?
In this whole region that was under, let's say, Soviet influence, we have 22 countries that have inherited a system of care that was placing children in large institutions. And those institutions are not good for children. We know that for decades, and that's why many countries have given up this type of care for a long time. So our efforts are really to understand better why children are ending up in these institutions and to make sure that these reasons are removed. Now we know that in Armenia the number of children in residential care has been reduced by 75% in the last 15 years, and we still have remaining around 4,000 children. Among them, many came into institutions because of poverty of their families. Poverty alone should never be the reason for removing child from family. It is much better to support the family. Another reason that drives children into institution is disability. Disability, again, should not be a reason for removing child from family. Family needs to get support to take care of their child if the child has disability. And then the third reason, when families are for various causes dysfunctional, be it mental health problems, be it violence, be it addiction. There are some cases in which children really need to be removed from their families, but these are rare, and those children should not end up in the big institutions. They should find their place in another family, and that is possible. We know this. We have done it in many other countries, and Armenia is moving in that direction.
Right. And you mentioned children with disabilities. According to UNICEF's own statistics, the level of institutionalization for children with disabilities is markedly higher than those without. And actually here it says 73% of children with disabilities do not have access to rehabilitation services. That's also from UNICEF's statistics. What are your main activities in this area and convincing the public that these services are needed and increasing access to them?
We are working on different levels. One is to really improve early identification and intervention so that children and families are given support when it is on time, so that much of disability can actually be prevented. We are also working with children of school age so that they can be enrolled in regular schools. That means that parents of children with disabilities, parents of children without disabilities, teachers, schools, and the communities need to be prepared. They need to know how to involve children in regular schools. And the main work that still needs to be done is about public attitudes and the stigma. And this is where we really need help of media, because we really cannot do it alone. It's a big change in the society, belief that a child with disability belongs to family, belongs to community. And that will take a little bit longer time.
Right. And what education opportunities are in place now for school teachers to learn how to handle children with disabilities in their classrooms? And is there widespread access to special needs classes in Armenian schools?
We have been working in the last couple of years in two ways. One is to provide additional training to teachers who are already working in schools. So we are doing this Mars by Mars. So we started by Syunik, Lori, and then moving into Tavush and some other Marses. And the other way is to provide better education to future teachers. So we are working with State Pedagogical University here in Yerevan, and they are linked with Minnesota University. We are facilitating a professional exchange so that future teachers are better prepared and they know how to work with different children. It's not that they have to work only with children with no disabilities or children with disabilities. First, children with disabilities have many different disabilities, but then other children are different too. So really adjusting teaching to needs of different children and different styles of communication, that is what we want to see with the teachers in Armenia.
Right. And a really big topic just overall in terms of Armenia's trajectory is equalizing development between cities, particularly Yerevan, and the rural regions. How do we go about doing that?
That is the biggest challenge for the country, I think, because we see that poverty overall in Armenia is high, and around 1/3 of children lives in poverty, but in some rural areas and in some parts of Armenia it is much higher. And there are economic ways, the ways that the government is trying to pursue is about economic development. What we think is that investing in children and they are learning from very early age is the way for these children to have better opportunities to catch up later in life. Otherwise, the gap is widening. There is bigger and bigger difference between urban children and children living in rural areas. And that is, I think, going to remain a big challenge for the country in the coming years.
Right. And on a final note, we've talked about changing public perceptions, and one of the UN's overall initiatives is these public education campaigns. How do you change the minds and turn the dial of people who are kind of set in their way of thinking, or maybe are not as interested in even hearing what organizations like UNICEF have to offer?
Very often people have certain set of views and attitudes because they never heard the other side of the story. So I think it's our responsibility to tell the whole story or tell the story from another angle. That is sufficient for many people to change the way they see the world. Of course, there are some who are very difficult to change because they feel that their value system has been challenged. So that requires a little bit more targeted communication, but it has been done in many, many different areas of life and work, and I believe we can do it, but very often we need public media to help us with that.
And could you share maybe a particular story of success in Armenia that you've seen an individual or a community change its way of thinking on an issue that UNICEF has worked on?
We have worked a lot on vaccination, and that has been successful. So Armenia is one of the countries that is still having a quite high rate of vaccination. In some other areas, I must say, we were also not so successful, but I would say, if you allow me an example from another country, because I worked in other countries as well. In only a couple of years in Bulgaria, we managed to really shift the view of the entire population on the institutional care for children. And this has been done through an ongoing public campaign involving all the big broadcasters in the country. And very often people are proud of being part of this change. They were even contributing with the small donations or with the advocacy in their own communities. So when people are offered to be part of the solution and something better, very often they are happy to join.
I think that's a really nice note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching CivilNet.